Divine Source, Great Spirit, our hearts are full of your joy as we are connecting in this space. Our minds feel lit up and full of your presence. We're grateful to be called here, and we're excited to see the messages that you feel would be most helpful for one and for all. Speak to us and through us for the highest good, and so it is.
Welcome to Talking Spirit. My name is Jutta, and I'm back with my lovely friend Elizabeth.
Greetings, everyone.
Welcome back. We are going to talk about the idea of choose again today, which is an idea that comes from a text called A Course in Miracles. But I'm sure it's also present in other traditions, and it actually has been a phrase that's been running through my mind the last few days because of a book that I've been listening to. It's sort of just stuck with me throughout the years because it's a huge series and it's very complex in a lot of ways. There's a lot of stuff happening, but the amazing thing that struck me so much was that the whole series culminates in one little teaching, and the teaching is choose again. So that was running through my head this morning, and then in prayer with Spirit, it also came through in my cards, and it came through in a little bit of in little different ways, and we'll see how we're going to explore it today. But yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is just this idea of everyone that comes here and seems to find themselves here. There's an inherent desire to grow and expand for pretty much everybody, I would say. And in terms of the way the Spirit looks at it, is that the only way to really expand is to go in the direction of Spirit and kind of have the inner compass always pointing north to the Spirit. And in my mind, it goes along with the idea of choose again, because every moment of every day, there's always a choice for us that we can make. And it always seems to be between our small self, our small weak self that can be hurt and can get upset and can get stuck in the idea that it's a small thing in a small body. And the other choice is to line up with the Spirit's vision and to really receive the truth of who we really are in any moment, and receive the beautiful rewards from that choice. So this is our moment to choose again right now and to line up with the Spirit, and we're happy you're joining us in it.
In our quick check-in before hitting the record button, there was something that Jutta said to me. Maybe it was the idea of the North Node that was floating around in my mind. And there's the idea that your North Node is your destiny point. It speaks to the individual's destiny as if we have some separate destiny, right? But I like that idea as something to sort of be cognizant of, to sort of shoot for, in these moments where we might feel very stuck in our littleness. And I flashed on to some of my time when I was doing the training in Peruvian shamanism. And, it's very much about communing with the spirit through the mythic, through the symbols. And I always loved and felt very drawn to birds. The idea of the wings and the lift and flying. And I always liked the idea of the eagle and of turkey vultures, the massive expanse of the wings. And, there's, of course, so much more symbolism and meaning that people have ascribed to them. But in the Peruvian shamanism, I really liked this idea of the archetypal energy of eagle or condor, turkey vulture, getting up above the battlefield, getting up above the minutia, up above the personality and the worldly thinking, and to fly with the spirit. I just loved that. And I felt very much like I could relate to those kinds of ways of thinking about the spiritual path and thinking about the divine, and it just felt a little more relatable than some of the things that I kind of heard other people talk about at times about their spirituality. And so this idea that we talk about all the time, of like the vision, what's the spirit's vision? It's to be up above the battlefield, to be in our proper place, at home with the spirit in our minds. And I've needed to, for my entire life, choose again over and over again and get up out of the muck. And it's a very practical thing we're talking about. The mental states, the emotional states that we often are really hung up in, there isn't a way out of them within them. There is not a way to stay in those ways of being and get out. You need to be lifted up out of them. And this idea of the power of our mind and the power of our destiny, what is calling us, is more powerful than anything. But as you said, we have to get into the choice that we want that other world. We want that other way of being. We want to make the choice within ourselves to get out of this experience that for me did feel like hell, and be choosing to get in alignment with what feels like my divine nature.
Lovely. I love that you brought up the eagles, because I saw an eagle this morning hovering around very high up in the sky, just circling around, getting a good look at everything. But also I love the last thing you talked about, because as you were talking, I was thinking about the Albert Einstein quote about that you can't solve a problem from the same place that it was created in. It to me links in with this, connection to a higher vision, that, when we seem to find ourselves in conflict, in some situation that we can't seem to find a way out of, that's, very uncomfortable and confusing, and there's fear, and we just find ourselves stuck in these problem ruts. There's never any way out while looking at the specifics of all of those problems. We do have to get above the battlefield, like you said. Those problems are these battlefields that we can get stuck in and can make ourselves stuck in by choice, which is not something that most people really like to hear. That, you chose this problem situation in some way. But I think this path really requires us to become very honest with ourselves around how what we choose decides on how we feel. And so we can kind of turn it around by, how do I feel? And that is telling me what I'm choosing as well. So if there is a lot of anxiety and fear and just seeing problems everywhere, there is somewhere in the mind, there's been a choice made for something other than the spirit's vision. And it's a deep opportunity usually to really look at that and take it in and take the responsibility and really bring the choice back into our minds and say, yeah, actually, I don't really like how this feels, so I need something different. And it's kind of like that Einstein quote: you have to realize that you can't fix the problem in the same place where it was created, which means that it's somewhere completely outside of what you can see. And that requires a lot of trust and faith and open mindedness, which is a really lovely state to get into, open mindedness.
Yeah, I was guided to pick some cards for this talk, and the two that came out for me were one that's called the Lovers and one that's called Justice. And these are, from a tarot standpoint, these are called major arcana, and they're like big defining archetypal expressions that have a lot of oomph to them, you might say, in terms of their meaning. And I was saying to Yuta, from what I understand, the Lovers card has, for many, a different meaning today than what I understand it was intended to mean. Initially, it was intended to mean a choice point. So it was so incredible to have that come out. And, I've just been sitting with this message of the so-called Justice card, which in terms of worldly thinking, has a pretty harsh meaning at times. But on the card, there are two paths leading to who knows where. One seems like a white light lit up doorway, and one looks pretty shadowy and dark. And, the idea for the Justice card, as I've just been sitting and looking at it, is really speaking to the power of the mind. It's impartial. What we do with the mind, we get to choose. And the spirit won't interfere with our choice to be sick and suffering or our choice to be in our right mind. So this idea of justice is like our mind will reflect back to us impartially what we're holding within it. So, it's like we were talking before the talk about karma, cause and effect kind of a stuff. Well, that has a lot of messiness to it in terms of how the mind thinks about it. It's kind of the retribution sort of idea. But this choice point really is this justice embodied. If I'm sitting in for some reason, spirit and my personality like to say, if I'm sitting in my poopy diaper, there's just a lightheartedness that's come in for me now around this. But it's like if I'm sitting and cultivating a trash heap as my mind, I'm going to receive those reflections and those people coming to dump at my trash dump. And if I'm being impartial in how my mind is working, if I want to choose to cultivate a garden where flowers are blooming and little butterflies come and grasshoppers hang out and frogs show up, it doesn't need to be a good or a bad or a right or a wrong. It's just a choice. And for me, the conditioning as I've experienced it, that I seem to have come in with or seem to have received from the world and others, it required a lot of kind of tacking back and forth, in and out of those two kind of choice points. And the kind of messiness, the trash heap, there's something to it that it's kind of like people, I'm seeing when there are accidents on a highway, like people become fixated with the accident, right? You want to see the accident, or, some really foul smell captures your attention and you get locked onto it. Some of that kind of darkness, it can be very compelling. It can seem so real and true. There are mechanisms in the mind that make it feel as if you have no power to make a different choice. And so this idea that we really, 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 in my experience, have got to get into a place where we're deeply, deeply devoted to finding a consistent place in the garden rather than in the trash dump, you know? It has to be over and over and over coming back to, what do you want, Elizabeth? Thank God Spirit had me over and over again writing that in my daily writing, because it helped me in a moment where I might have been really stuck within myself, go, oh, what do I want? Ah, I want peace of mind. What do I want? Ah, I want to feel loving in my heart. What do I want? Ah, I want to feel generous of spirit. That stuff took me out of the muck. It wasn't revealing itself in the muck. It was revealing itself by this little spark in my heart that the Spirit planted in there that became that little homing device, you know? So.
Yeah, that's great. It makes me think of, there was a time when I was still in the spiritual community and I was actually in a relationship with somebody, and there came a moment where it seemed like the guidance was that he was to go back home and clean up his life at home a little bit. So, I'm in this relationship and then it seems like my relationship goes away. And I found myself really stuck in feeling like I missed him and like something was going wrong. And I was depressed and just so unhappy when he left. Even though we were having calls and, we were having Skype calls and stuff like that, and we're seeing each other, but I just couldn't get out of it. And I ended up having a joining with one of the sort of elder community members and just sharing all of my sorrows and crying and all of this stuff. And at one point, she just asked me what I felt I really wanted in my heart, and it actually took me, like in your experience too, with the morning writing and stuff like that, this question of, okay, what do you actually want? It really took me out of all of the things, all the specifics of that situation, and actually brought me back home into my heart. And I got really quiet and I got very calm. And I just came out with the words, I want a peaceful heart. And it was like, the reflection I got back was like, yeah. And it was still, even after just kind of coming into that place, I was watching all the temptations to go back into the specifics and start missing again, and just pick up the piece of trash again out of the trash pile, and try to just have a life with that again. But yeah, something in that joining has always stuck with me. Just the question, like, okay, what do you really want? And even getting the reminder of the answer that I gave in that moment, there's something I cherish that memory because it felt very powerful in the moment. And it's nice sometimes for oneself to even get a reflection back that actually there is something much deeper that I want here that is not found on the surface. It's a reflection of the deep calling that we do have in our hearts for being united with the Spirit in terms of our will and our desire and our purpose. So that was just coming to mind. And there was something else that was kind of coming in as well, like this idea around choosing and choose again and making choices and choosing wisely and stuff like that. And the choice that we're talking about here is one that kind of happens at the level of the mind. And it's not about choosing different things in the world and, this thing is a reflection of the Spirit and this one isn't. It's not really like that at all. And I feel like when we look at things in that way, we can get stuck also in like this paralysis, like this choice paralysis, that we can make the wrong choice in terms of the specifics, which I guess in a way it seems like we can. But I feel like, even this feeling that we could make the wrong choice is a reflection of actually wanting to make the right choice and make the choice with spirit, right? So even just the fact that there's a thought around, okay, which one is the right thing here, is a reflection that we actually want to be lined up with the spirit. And sometimes, in terms of the specifics, the choice isn't clear. And for me, that's always where experimentation comes in and just trying things out. So that was just kind of another like little piece of it that was floating through my mind with it. Just remember that if you have this feeling of that you could be choosing the wrong thing in your life, it's actually a reflection of wanting to be truly helpful and wanting to be in the channel with the spirit, which that's all you really want. And then beyond that, the stuff really doesn't matter. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great that you brought in, the ways that the ego, the personality, the mind can get hung up with these kinds of ideas, or you might even call it a teaching. I definitely, it's just sort of flashing back onto many of those times of hearing that message. It did get me twisted up as if there was some thing I should be tracking in form. It did sometimes rattle my cage, but it was for the purification. If we use those inner states, if we use those moments of, oh my gosh, I'm going to get it wrong, as purely a gateway into our minds, into our emotions, into our belief systems, that's really ultimately where the spirit was trying to take me, right? Is in to look at those things, in to experience my angst, my worry, my confusion, my doubt, my hatred, my whatever. So, yeah, it's good to be cognizant of the fact that we can get spun out with this idea of like choose again, as if there's a choice in form. But it's all being used. I really appreciate, when I learned of David Hoffmeister, who has played a big role in Utah's life and has certainly been a big bright light that came into my mind. I really appreciated that. I often heard him say, we're just using it all for the healing. It's all Spirit's plan to help us, as I heard it, clean out the cobwebs, help us refine our thinking, help us refine the way we're using our energy and our attention every moment. There are lots of people that have said that on my path in lots of different ways, but I heard him say it so consistently and in a way that just really drove it home for me. So, we get the lift into the next layer of ourself by whomever, however the spirit chooses to. So, yeah, it's good because a lot of the early seeming stages of our purification, something like a choose again, can feel really complicated. But as we go along, that refinement really, it just becomes like the switch, the light bulb gets turned on. We've done it enough where we've brought our attention back. We've been reoriented by the spirit over and over again, where we see that is the choice that we want to make. So that if we find ourselves, like this morning, I told you we had published our talk, and I was finishing up the video work, and I'm the one that uploads it, and I just felt yuck. I felt yuck about the video, about the way I put it together, about the sound quality, And yesterday I had the seeming form experience was that I ate a bunch of candy. I had a big candy event at the library as I was working on the video, and I just woke up feeling like crap. And I said to her, I don't like any of the stuff we did. And I didn't need to really choose again. But like that's an example, right? Where there was something in my mind that was looking like a candy hangover, right? It wasn't, but it was just there was something in my mind working itself out. And I didn't really need to choose again. It's like it just sort of naturally happens, right? I've got my talk that I'm going to do with Yuta. I expressed to her how I was feeling. It's just like it becomes part of the tilling of the soil in your garden. You don't have to dig through all of the really hard silt and sand and rock, and it's like you've done the cultivation of the garden. Now all you have to do every so often is pluck a couple little weeds out, or realize, oh, I forgot to water the garden yesterday, whatever, right? It becomes less complicated to make the choice because you've kind of developed that muscle. But in the early days, for me, it felt like carrying the rock up the mountain, the big one, the boulder, right? So.
Yeah, there's such a temptation in the beginning to really get the whip out, right? When you make the wrong choice, seemingly. And it's like, oh, wait, why did I eat all that candy? There could have been so much around it, but, like get the whip out. Why'd you do that again? You know that, this happens and you've done this so many times before and, and all of this stuff. But yeah, like you said, as we learn what's really valuable, the choice, like you said, it is a natural movement away from even the idea that you really want to make up any stories around the candy. There's such a temptation, I think, in the beginning to make stories around where you're going wrong and exactly what's going on in your mind around whatever patterns you want to be finding. And there's much less storytelling in my mind in the last, I don't know, few years, and it's become so easy. And a lot of times when I talk with people as well, they start trying to want to explain what's going on and want to throw concepts at what's going on in their minds. I'm like, no, just tell me how you feel. Just tell me how you feel, because it's much simpler. Just tell me how you feel. The other stuff doesn't really matter. And sometimes that's all that's needed in order to actually make that switch to spirit again. Here's the feeling. What do I want now? It's really lovely, isn't it? The whole spiritual path in the end is very simple. And that is not to say that there won't be complications and there won't be stuff coming up and, things to heal. That's just part of the game. But our minds were created to be joined with our source, always. So in any moment where it feels like we're alone and we're separate and we're weak, there's this unceasing call to come back into unification, to find our north node again, to, get the compass out and see which direction we're going and then turn straight north. It's like this natural movement that just wants to be allowed, and it's actually the easiest way to go through life. Everything else is conflict. Any kind of personal endeavor, anywhere, where we need to get our hands into the pie, it's going to cause more friction than, what we think it might give us. It doesn't matter what we think it'll give us, but if it's not lined up with going back home, going north, then it will just cause conflict in our minds. It's not anything that really has any true effect, but in terms of our experience and in terms of our inner feeling, there will be turmoil and stress and disconnect, and that's not really what anybody wants. So this is what choosing again means, is to remember that you actually just want to be happy and you want to feel at peace and you want to feel lined up with your purpose. And the only way to do that is to connect with the spirit. So, yeah, and thanks to anyone who's followed this recording until the end. We're excited to see you next time. Thank you, Elizabeth. Bye for now.
Bye for now.